Welcome back to this new inspirational video. Today I wanted to go over a piece of literature written by Emmet Fox titled Life After Death, and it's from the book The Power Through Constructive Thinking. So today I'm going to narrate this wonderful information that is contained in this chapter, because it can give us some insights into the nature of reality from a spiritual perspective, which is always useful lest we get totally lost in the physical side of life alone. He started this chapter out by saying the following: "There is absolutely no reason to fear death. The same God is on the other side of the grave as on this side, and the Bible tells us that God is love, and we know that He is also boundless intelligence and infinite power. It is true that most people do fear death more or less, but this fear is partly that normal fear of the unknown that is apt to affect us all, the fear, as it were, of taking a leap in the dark. And partly it is the result of the false teaching on the subject that most people acquire in their youth. In the hope of disciplining them and frying them into good conduct, people have been taught throughout the ages to regard death with horror. Such, of course, is a mistaken policy, because good never comes out of evil, and fear in particular is never constructive. Nevertheless, people have been taught in most places and in all ages to fear death, in the hope that under the shadow of that fear they would behave themselves better during life. The time has now come, however, when the mass of people no longer believe in these threats, but are prepared to hear the truth. The actual truth is that there is no death. When a person seems to die, all that happens is that they leave their body here and go over onto the next plane, otherwise unchanged. They fall asleep here to wake up on the other side minus their physical body, which was probably more or less damaged, but enriched with the knowledge that they have not really died. This is the story of what we call death, and in most cases it is easier than being born. To understand clearly how this process comes about, you have to realize that you really possess not one body, but two. It may surprise you to be told that right here at the present moment, you have not only the physical body that you know about, the thing that you see when you look into the glass, but a second body which is nonetheless substantial because you cannot see it, and that this body is made of ether. This statement may surprise you, but it is true. The etheric body is the same shape as your physical body, but it is slightly larger and it interpenetrates the physical body as air fills a sponge. It does not surround it but interpenetrates it. It may help you to think of it as a replica of the physical body in ether. There are a few people who can see the etheric body when they concentrate for that purpose, because they have the power of contacting much finer vibrations than can be perceived by the ordinary physical senses. But of course, the vast majority lack this power. All the time you are awake, your two bodies remain together, interpenetrating each other. But when you fall asleep, the greater part of your etheric slips out of the physical, and in reality, the slipping out of the etheric is what constitutes sleep. The same sort of thing happens when you become unconscious, either from taking an anesthetic or from a blow on the head, or if you fall into what is called a trance, or into some form of coma. All these conditions differ somewhat one from another, but they all have this in common, that more or less of the etheric slips out of the physical body, taking consciousness with it. The etheric body is not simply homogeneous a thing, but is composed of several different ethers of different densities. Nevertheless, for our purpose we shall treat it as one. The physical body is composed of solids, liquids and gases, and of many complicated and distinct organs. But in studying the biography of a man, we treat his body as a unit, and in the same way we shall treat the etheric one as one. Now, it is the etheric body which is the repository of all your thoughts and feelings. It includes what are often called the conscious and the subconscious minds. It is the psyche of the psychologist, and it is in fact your human personality. That is why personality survives death, because it resides in the etheric, which passes over intact, and not in the physical, which breaks up into decomposition when it is left alone. I have said that your etheric is the seat of all feeling, and this is true. It may surprise you to hear that there is no sensation in the physical body, but such is the case. When you think you have a pain in your physical body, that pain is really in the etheric counterpart, and that is why anesthesia is possible. When you take a general anesthetic, the etheric is thrown out and therefore you do not experience bodily sensations. People undergoing a major operation under an anesthetic have sometimes remained perfectly conscious but out of the body, and have watched the surgeon at work with interest and attention. When you take a local anesthetic such as a Novocaine, the local part of that etheric is driven out and you have no feeling there. But as the effect of it wears out, that portion of the etheric returns, and as those who have been in the hands of the dentist know, the pain gradually comes back. In all these cases, when the etheric leaves the physical body, it remains attached to it by an etheric ligament, very much like a boy's kite floating at the end of the string, which he holds in his hand. The etheric connection is called in the Bible the silver cord. It is the bluish gray in color and is so elastic that the etheric body can go very long distances away and still remains attached to the physical body. In sleep, by far, the greater part of the etheric sleeps out. In very materialistic and otherwise undeveloped people, the etheric remains only a yard or two from the body, usually floating overhead. But with people of some degree of mental training, and especially with those who have some spiritual development, it passes right over onto the next plane, and sometimes beyond that. The difference between normal sleep and anesthesia and the different kinds of trance is a question of how much of the etheric goes out of that particular time. That is all. When we see people nodding asleep and then waking up and then nodding again, it means that the etheric is wabbling in and out. So your etheric slips out every time you go to sleep and returns when you wake up again. That is, as long as the silver cord remains unbroken. Now, what is death? Well, death is the breaking of the silver cord. As long as that remains intact, you are alive, whether you are conscious or not. But once it is broken, you are dead. Death is the severing of the silver cord. As soon as it is cut, you are dead. You are definitely cut off from your physical body, and your life on this plane is over. So this, then, is death. Your etheric body, which is your personality, has severed its connection with the physical body, and as that body is your only means of functioning on the physical plane, you are finished with your earth life. Now we come to the vital question. What precisely is it that happens to a person when they die, when the silver cord is severed? What do they think? What do they feel? Well, as a rule, they immediately fall into a state of total unconsciousness, which may last for days or even weeks. During this time, the etheric, that is they themselves, pass over onto the next plane, and they are in the next world. Here in due course they wake up very much as we wake up from sleep on this plane, and their new life has begun. It is an interesting fact that at the instant preceding death, the whole of the past life unfolds before the mind, exactly like a moving picture reel flashing by. The actual speed is so great that it all happens in a split second, yet the mind sees every detail clearly. It is possible to come so near death that without actually dying, one can still come back and continue to live after this has happened, but usually only in cases of near death from asphyxiation. Only in near drowning, suffocation or gassing as a rule is the process slow enough to admit of this. This experience is really, of course, the unfolding of the subconscious mind, the judgment books of scripture, and an exceedingly awe-inspiring and sometimes terrible experience as one can easily imagine. It is with this authentic inside story of their life fresh in their memory that the traveler begins their life on the other side. Here it is natural to ask, where is the next world situated? Is it up in the sky or down under the ground? The answer is that it is neither of these places. The next world is actually all around us here. The so-called dead are carrying on their lives right here where we are now, but in their own world and in their own way. The reason we do not see them around us or collide with them is the same reason that one radio program does not interfere with another. They are on a different wavelengths. There is not merely one etheric plane as many people think, but many, each one less dense than the previous one, going on to infinity, and they all interpenetrate one another. The activities of any one plane do not interfere in any way with those of any of the others, for the reason just given. There is a very great difference between the density of one of these planes and that of the next one to it, so that normally there is no passing from one to another. Upon waking up on the next plane, the dead person notes certain familiar aspects in the world about them, but remarks some curious differences too. If they have been very ill or if they are an elderly person, they are agreeably surprised by a sense of well-being and youth. This is because, having left the worn-out body on the earth plane, it no longer restricts the full functioning of their mind. They are able to see their etheric body, and it now seems to them as substantial as the old physical body seemed. Again, one of the principal differences between this plane and the next is that there are 4 dimensions over there, whereas here, of course, we know only 3. All objects there are 4-dimensional, and it takes them some time to get used to that. Of course, a 4-dimensional object cannot be described here in words, but you will easily see that it means an enormous extension of experience and therefore of interest. Consider how tremendously the world of a 2-dimensional being, say a worm, would be expanded if they became 3-dimensional, and you can realize something of the enhanced interest of the next plane when one of us goes over there. Some writers unfortunately are in the habit of speaking of heaven as the 4th dimension. This is quite wrong, because heaven is a world of infinite dimension. What metaphysical writers say about heaven is usually correct, except that it is not the 4th dimension. Also, there are new colors and new sounds on the next plane, far surpassing in beauty the colors and the sounds which we have here. And it is a fact that new experiences of every sort awaits the traveler on their arrival. Perhaps the most startling change that the traveler has to meet is the fact that over there, thought reading is the normal means of communication. In the next world, thoughts are read directly, and therefore there is no deception. Everyone is seen to be just what he is, and there is no room for hypocrisy or pretense. All the labor and nervous strain of keeping up appearances that wears out the lives of so many foolish people over here is unknown over there. You pass for what you are, and that is the end of the matter. One soon gets accustomed to this, and then no one there would wish it to be otherwise. There are no old people on the other side for the following reason. What we see here as an elderly gentleman is in fact a man of mature mind, whose body has begun to decay so that all his faculties are dimmed. He sees poorly, is almost deaf, moves about with difficulty, finds his memory impaired, and in many cases it is difficult to make him understand things we wish to say to him. These conditions are simply due to the decay of the physical body, preventing his etheric from functioning efficiently, and now that the physical body is thrown away, he naturally regains the full use of his powers. And so in the next world he will be a man in the prime of life. On the other hand, children who pass over, not having yet reached maturity of mind, continue to grow up on the other side until they too reach the prime of life. There are many different localities on the next plane, differing very much from one another, just as in this world we find countries as different as Sweden and Italy, for example, and even in the same city we find such different conditions as the squalid streets of slumland and the beautiful sections occupied by wealthy and cultured people. Indeed, there is a much greater variety of living conditions over there than anything that we find on this earth, so that one might compare the going to the experience of a man who spends most of his life on a small island here and then suddenly leaves that island to explore the whole world. What is it that determines the kind of place to which we will go after death and the sort of people among whom you will find yourself? Of course, it is not a matter of chance or luck, any more than it is the nature of your surroundings here. You will go to the sort of place and be among the sort of people for whom you have prepared yourself by your habitual thinking and your mode of living while on this earth. No one sends you anywhere. You naturally gravitate to the place where you belong. You have built up a certain character, that is, a certain mentality, by your years of thinking, speaking and acting on this plane. That is the kind of person you are at the moment, and you find yourself in conditions corresponding to your personality. Remember that death makes positively no change in you. You are just the same person that you were before it happened. You have your full memory and you remember the general events of your life just as well, and often somewhat better, than you did toward the end of your life here. Students of metaphysics understand that all of our conditions in this world are the result of our thoughts and convictions, and precisely by the same thing is true of the next world. On this plane, people with the same interests tend to attract one another. The law that birds of a feather flock together holds throughout the universe. There is, however, one extremely important difference. On the other side, your thoughts are demonstrated immediately. In this world, as we know, it may take days, weeks and even years before mental states come out into manifestation, but over there they demonstrate at once. Whatever you think or feel strongly, you experience instantly as an outer condition, and this is rather confusing at first. Let me digress here for a moment, because what he just stated is just like Neville Goddard has said as well in his own teachings, and it's based on what I've already shared myself. This ties into beautifully with Emmet Fox's work, is that lucid dreaming again, is that ability to experience part of this so-called afterlife, this different world. Where I've told it on many videos in the past, I could instantly manifest whatever I was thinking about. Here we have confirmation, or at least a reminder, that even Emmet Fox knew about this, and therefore I wanted to remind you that this is possible for you to experience while you're even alive, because I've done it. So if you've not had the experience again, it should give you some great hope and kind of make the physical journey a little easier when you know that all the struggles here aren't the only part you'll ever experience. This is only temporary. Something much greater is awaiting all of us. Now let's go on. To those on the other side, the ether seems just as solid as physical matter does to us. And in the beginning they expect it to have the inertia which it does not possess. They're surprised when they constantly find that it submits immediately to the molding of their thought. They feel rather like a person whose automobile gets out of control and runs away with them. They think and something happens to correspond. This surprises or frightens them, and this fright causes an intensification of the phenomena, or perhaps a seeming cataclysm, and confusion, worse confounded, multiplies until the newcomer pulls themselves together and learns to control their thinking. One would naturally suppose that under these conditions they need only be very careful what they do think and all will be well, and this is perfectly true, but in practice it is difficult instantly to change one's habits of thought in this way. If we have accustomed ourselves when on earth to negative thinking, the thoughts of fear, criticism, ill will or sickness, it takes some time to overcome such habits when we get across. Most of us know only too well, particularly those of us who have tried the 7-day mental diet, that changing our current of thought is not an easy matter, but of course it has to be done. At this point, let it be clearly understood that this next plane is not heaven, or the conscious presence of God. Those people who work through great difficulties in this world and go over with an enlightened consciousness find themselves so much better off that they sometimes think it must be heaven, but it is not. It is a limited etheric world, less limited than is this plane, but limited nevertheless, and just as liable to discord and decay. Indeed, objects over there decay much more quickly than do objects on this plane. Instead of broken or worn out objects lying about for a long time as they do with us, the forms in which people are no longer interested melt right back into the ether immediately, and this makes newcomers think that there is no decay there, but there is, only it is ended much more quickly. In our world, for example, a chair, let us say, or a suit of clothes, is manufactured whereupon it immediately begins to wear out. This process, however, is a very slow one, so much so that even after it becomes too shabby or damaged for further use, the fragments of it still lie about for years and years before falling into dust, if not otherwise disposed of. On the next plane, a discarded etheric form fades out very quickly. You do not meet God on the next plane any more than you do on this plane. God is everywhere. Of course, he is fully present on the next plane just as he is on this plane. But there, as here, he is to be contacted only in one's own consciousness by some form of prayer or spiritual treatment. Heaven is that perfect state of consciousness in which one is in full realization of the divine presence. In that consciousness there is no limitation or evil or decay of any kind. When one attains to that condition, he has finished with etheric planes just as surely as he has finished with the plane of physical matter. If you can reach to that level of consciousness while still in this world, and a few have succeeded in doing so, you do not die or go across to the etheric planes at all. You go straight to heaven from this earth. Moses did this, and Enoch and Elijah and a few others. This is what is called translation or dematerialization. It is accomplished by the overcoming of the sense of separation from God, which is really the fall of man. It means overcoming selfishness, sensuality, criticism, fear, and other such things. It means living nearer and nearer to God every day. Of Enoch, the Bible says, he walked with God before he was translated, and indeed there is no other way to freedom. There are some very unpleasant localities in the next world. It is no use ignoring this fact just for sentimental reasons. But the average person does not go to any of them. People who lead very evil lives on earth, whose minds are chiefly given up to hatred, deceit or sensuality, will find themselves in such places. This does not mean the average man or woman who may fall into wrongdoing under the pressure of severe temptation, but people whose whole lives are deliberately wrong. These are the places referred to as hell by the Orthodox preachers. They are not places of vindictive punishment, and they certainly do not last forever, but only until the delinquent has seen the error of their ways and has reformed. Let me repeat that no one sends anyone to these places. They are merely the natural surroundings of a soul which has gotten itself into that condition by repeatedly choosing the lower in preference to the higher. Neither does anyone determine when the punishment will cease. The escape from such conditions takes place automatically as soon as the soul is sufficiently changed. Someone may be inclined to ask whether it is appropriate to speak of localities on the next plane, since such places are really but the outpicturing of the subject's own thoughts. The answer is that this is all that localities are on this plane. What we call a country or a city or a house or a room in this world is but outpictured thought, nothing more. And indeed, the only fundamental differences over there are the absence of inertia, which make things happen almost instantaneously, and the existence of the extra dimension. So it happens that once people wake up in the next world and begin to get used to the conditions, they usually have a great sense of physical well-being and a most interesting and instructive life. The conditions of living are utterly different from ours. There your memory is no longer of the slightest use to you. You can't take it with you, and only the mental and spiritual wealth that you have accumulated can go along. There is no money as we understand it because, a thought being immediately demonstrated, there is no need to purchase objective possessions. What you're able to think of clearly, you have. Many fine things will still be out of reach of many people there, because they cannot clearly conceive them. And is not this the exact truth about our own world also? In this world, anything that you can clearly conceive comes into your possession if you really want it, and anything that you truly understand becomes yours in a deeper sense, for you never can lose it. The chief difference between the two worlds is once more that results come so much more slowly in this world, owing to the inertia of the physical matter, which over there they do not have to meet. There is no childbirth on the next plane, and therefore no marriage or family life as we understand it. And when you consider the extraordinary importance of the family on this plane, you will see that without it, the whole scheme of living must be different. Will you meet your relatives and friends when you go over? People naturally wonder whether they will see again those whom they loved who have passed out of sight. And to tell the truth, many are quite apprehensive of having to renew their contact with people whom they have disliked, members of their family, perhaps whom they much prefer never to meet again. The fact is that where there is a strong emotional link, either of love or hatred, there is likely to be a meeting. Where there is a strong link of genuine love, there is sure to be a meeting. Where there is no particular feeling between two people, there will not be a meeting. Of course, love will take care of itself, but there is a real danger that if you allow yourself to indulge in hatred of anyone, you will meet when you have both passed over. To prevent this happening, destroy the link by ceasing to hate. Forgive the other person and set them free in your thought. You do not have to like them, but you must wish them well. Do not imagine that your family will ever be reassembled on the other side. Family relationships are for this plane only and have no existence there. Your father will not be your father on the other side, but a friend who played the role of father over here. Your daughter will no longer be your daughter there, but a friend who enacted the part of daughter to you for a number of years on Earth. Some people imagine that the whole Earth family must be reassembled as a family over there, but consider what this would mean. You had two parents and probably some brothers and sisters. Each of your parents had two parents and probably some brothers and sisters, and so forth. And so you will see what that compulsory reunion of families would involve in a few generations. The actual fact is, as I've stated, that the relationships of parents and children, brothers and sisters, uncles and nephews, husbands and wives, are but temporary arrangements for this life only. If two brothers or a parent and child have a strong bond of sympathy in this life, they will meet again and perhaps be closely associated on the next plane. But this will be because of the bond of sympathy and not because they happen to be members of the same family here. When a marriage is satisfying to both parties here, the partnership can continue by mutual consent on the other side. Otherwise, death dissolves a marriage and the two need never even meet again, much less resume any kind of mutual bond. Beyond the next plane there are other planes, and after a certain length of time over there, most people develop mentally and spiritually so that they graduate out of that plane onto the next higher one. That plane has 5 dimensions, and the ether composing it is far less dense than that of the one next to us, and it in turn presents many new opportunities to the developing soul. After death, one's instinct is to lead somewhat the same type of life as he had been accustomed to here, and this is why some intellectual or artistic training, and particularly some spiritual development, makes so much difference. There is no limit over there to the opportunities for intellectual study and attainment. Most of the age-old and to us unsuitable problems of philosophy and religion can be answered on the next plane with some study and trouble. Of course, this only means that new ones then come up for consideration, because as we lengthen our vision, so does the horizon but grow. Nevertheless, wonderful progress in the understanding of life can be and is made along these lines. The artist and the musician at last begin to get things their own way. The lack of commercial aptitude, which usually marks the genuine artist and for which they are so often punished in this world, is no longer a detriment over there, and the etheric conditions present little or no difficulty, such as physical matter does, to the development of literary, artistic and musical gifts. It is worth mentioning that even a little study along intellectual lines while in this world, and even a very little genuine interest in art or music, is sufficient to start off the newcomer over there under very favorable conditions. On the other hand, those who know nothing whatever about these things find it much more difficult to make the beginning over there than they would here. Scientific studies such as chemistry, physics, electricity and so forth can be tremendously developed over there, since the nature of vibration is far better understood on the other side than it is with us. The man who benefits least by the change to the new world is the materially minded person who has developed no mental or spiritual resources whatever while on this plane. Being interested only in material things, in food and drink and money, in social success, worldly honors and material possessions in general, they naturally find themselves rather stranded in a world where none of these things have any meaning. Nevertheless, if they have led an average, honest, clean life, and on the whole behaved decently according to their lights, they will be nothing worse than extremely bored until their higher faculties begin to unfold in the course of time. Now consider the man or woman who lives wholly for the body and is dominated by it, the sensualist, the drug addict. Physical cravings being part of the mentality are of course carried over to the next plane, but there is no physical body through which these appetites may be satisfied, and so the victim is tormented by desire but unable to satisfy it until in the course of time these desires fade out by starvation. This is the natural punishment for allowing the physical body to assume control, and surely it is punishment enough. Indeed, we find what is called poetic justice running right through the universe. The rewards of positive thought and action are the natural consequences following upon these things, and the punishment following upon wrongdoing or neglect are natural consequences too. Like begets like. Take care of your body and you are rewarded with the joy of health, not with money. Take care of your business and you are rewarded with prosperity, not necessarily with health. Work hard at your music and the reward is to be an accomplished musician. Neglect it and no money will buy the proficiency that you have failed to earn. Ill-treat your body and the natural punishment is sickness and discomfort, not a falling off in the value of your stocks and bonds. And so on through the whole of life. We reap as we sow, whether it be on earth plane or on any of the etheric planes which lie beyond. It may be said here that it is not necessary to lead an aesthetic life in this world in order to be happy in the next. All the ordinary harmless pleasures of life may be enjoyed in reasonable moderation without involving any suffering or hardship afterward. It sometimes happens when a person dies that instead of them going into a coma immediately after the silver cord is broken, there may be an interval of hours or longer in which they retain full possession of their faculties, and sometimes they do not even realize that they are dead, though as a rule they see their physical body lying prone and know what has happened. In such cases, they will make a strong effort to communicate with their closest friend. Suppose, for example, that a man died in the street and retained his faculties in this way. He would immediately try to get home to his wife to tell her what had happened. Let us suppose that his home was 10 miles away in the suburbs. Having now only an etheric body, he would really need but think strongly of his home, and he would find himself there in a few seconds or less. Because his etheric body could pass through houses, hills, or any other physical obstruction that might lie in the way. As a matter of fact, however, habit might lead him to go through the motions of walking to the nearest railroad station and getting into a train, or he might clamber onto a streetcar. On entering his home, he would instinctively shout to his wife, but having no physical organs, no sound would be produced. The effort would be purely mental and she would hear nothing. He would then probably walk over to her and attempt to grab her arm, but his etheric substance would simply pass through it without making any impression. It might happen, however, in such a case that the strong mental effort would reach the consciousness of the wife or whomever he was endeavoring to reach, and then she would afterwards say, "My husband appeared to me for a moment at the time he was killed." His thought would be so charged with emotion that it would be strong enough upon reaching her to cause her to project a momentary thought form of him. It might, however, not be strong enough for this, and then she would merely say, "I knew that something had happened to my husband not long before I got the news." This is the explanation of most such stories which are so constantly talked about. Yes, you know what's interesting, if I digress again here, but what he just said reminds me of when my mom passed away. When she took her own life, very tragic, I know, very sad times. I was on my way to her home, riding my bicycle, because that's what we do over in the Netherlands much more often than America perhaps. But anyways, that was the case. I was riding my bike, and I felt I had to go home. I had to turn back and go to my own place, not to her home, but to my place. So I turned around, went back to my own apartment, and later that evening the police told me that she died that morning. Not long after, or maybe during that time that I was planning on coming over, she took her own life. So this even happened to me, and I'm sure if you've lost someone through death, it may have happened to you in some way. It's very fascinating that these things occur, right? Because they show us more and more about the nature of reality that we might otherwise miss. Now, to be really honest, I'm going to cut it off here, because he's just gonna go on about talking to dead people, and this is all fine and all, if that's what you want to look into. You could study this for yourself, but I think the major point about life after death was already covered here. Hopefully it gave you some insights into life after death. The most important parts all happened within the first 30 minutes of this lecture, not gonna lie. Because after that, as I kept narrating it myself, I started to notice, well, you know, these things are not that necessary to know about or to actually study. At least I don't think they're really helpful to any of us. Whether you can communicate with dead people, how you should bury the body, and what you should do after someone is dead. I think we should all decide on that for ourselves. But knowing about the nature of the soul and the other dimensions of life, that is what it was mostly about. So I'm glad we at least got that on video. Now, if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing to receive inspirational videos on a regular basis. And with that being said, dear viewer, never forget that we are the dreamers.